Hello, today is my food for thought with Jonathan H. Westover. And hello, Jonathan.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah. Just to give my audience a quick idea who Jonathan is, Dr. Jonathan Westover is an associate professor of organizational leadership and department chair in the Woodbury School of Business, Utah Valley University, academic director of the UVU Center of Social Impact and the UVU SIMLab, and the faculty fellow for ethics in public life, previously the associate director in the Center for the Study of Ethics. He is also an experienced organizational development HR leadership consultant with the Human Capital Innovations, LLC, with experience transforming organizations across the globe. Additionally, to give you an idea, Jonathan has published in academic journals, books in popular media like The Economist or The Wall Street Journal, just to mention a few. I hope, Jonathan, I summarized your impressive track record appropriately, but do you want to add something?
No, I don't need to add anything. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I think maybe the only thing I'll say, which you alluded to, is that I see myself as a scholar practitioner. So I play dual roles in my professional life. I'm an academic. I am a professor at a university. I hold leadership roles at the university, but I also do consulting work with my company, Human Capital Innovations. And I really feel passionately about having both roles inform the other. So as a researcher and academic, I hope that my research background will inform my consulting work. And as a consultant, I hope that I can pull that into both informing the types of questions I ask in my research, but also in how I teach my students. And hopefully it's a mutually beneficial kind of role. And I feel strongly that this scholar practitioner approach is what students need, but it's also what organizations need.
I think, yes, definitely, because theory, the academic part is very important, but it's built as well, theory always on good praxis. And if you can combine both, your students will benefit from it, and the companies you're consulting or you're working with, they are benefiting quite a lot of it. And the Utah Valley University, I think they're doing this approach generally, or is it only with your section of the university there?
So generally, the university does have an anchor institution mindset, meaning that we see ourselves as a central hub of activity in our community to better and influence the surrounding community. And so a lot of students across the university do practical work or community engaged work, community-based research, service learning, consulting projects, those sorts of things, so that the students gain practical experience while they're going through their university studies. They're not just sitting in a classroom and reading and listening to lectures and writing papers, but they're doing real work for real organizations to develop their skill set. That's certainly something that we try to do across the university, but I think particularly in the School of Business and in my department of organizational leadership, that's the hallmark of what we do. Like every class, every professor is working with their students or trying to work with their students that way.
Especially leadership means you have to practice, means you can't stand in front of a big audience and talk without practice. That's definitely something, and just consuming knowledge doesn't help, means you have to apply it.
Yeah, it's not enough. It's important, to learn the theory. It's important to learn the methods, but then you actually have to apply it and you have to practice it. And if you're not practicing it, then any amount of book learning is not going to get you to where you want to go.
Kind of an ivory tower then, yeah? And then if you have to apply knowledge and then
right.
to combine it to something new, means by theory, by
That's
as well
right.
by practice. And that brings me probably to my first question, because you're having quite a long history in organization development and change management. And one thing most companies have as well, why do they need change? Why they need development over time? What is just in simple words for those who are not so firm and into this matter of change management and organizational development?
Yeah. Well, let me perhaps reframe the question just a little bit. I'm not so sure it's about why do organizations need change. It's simply the reality. Like, change is all around us. Change is inevitable. Change is always happening. So it's not like we choose whether or not we're going to change. We do change. We're constantly changing. Organizations are constantly changing. So the question is, how are we going to respond? Are we going to be proactive in our approach to change management and responding to the outside pressures and the internal dynamics of our organization, or are we going to simply be reactive? And if we're reactive, then we're missing out on opportunities to have a really strategic and sustainable approach to any of the types of shifts and adjustments that we're making, that all organizations have to make. It's just a fact. It's just reality. We don't get to choose not to change. I guess we could choose that, but if we choose that, we're probably going to be out of business within a couple of years. So change is inevitable. Change is always happening. The question then becomes, how do we do it effectively? Because so many people, it's probably human nature that we just tend to be resistant to change. We like the status quo. We like predictability. We like to feel like we're in control. And when things are changing around us, it can be threatening and we can start to resist. So leaders need to think through, what change strategically do they want to have happen? How are they going to approach those changes? How are they going to develop buy-in from throughout the organization? How are they going to implement the change? How are they going to sustain the change? These are all the different types of pieces and elements that leaders and their people need to be considering. And the challenge, the problem is that most organizations don't do it well. Most organizations, either because they don't have the skill set and the capabilities, or because they don't have the political will, the desire, the intentionality, that they don't approach change in a productive way. And so then they just end up devolving into turmoil and having a workplace filled with strife. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to embrace positive change. We're trying to move positively and agilely into the future so that we can be successful and have a strong, healthy environment for our people.
I see that, because I know by myself, most companies love this kind of equilibrium, but an equilibrium is a lie. It means everything is changing around you. You're part of a trend. And if you really want to be active to shape the future, you have to do something. You have to really to think about what will come and how you can change that in a way I want to participate on it. Otherwise, you're just reacting, and then you're kind of a play ball in a soccer match or a rugby game, and then it's not a good situation for a company, definitely. And
I think that's, if I can just respond to that real quick, I think that's what the vast majority of leaders and organizations end up spending most of their time doing, regardless of what their intention is. They end up just being reactionary, and they're just constantly trying to put out fires. And they end up spending almost all of their time just responding to urgent emergencies rather than doing the proactive strategic work that will reduce those numbers of emergencies and fires to be put out, and creating a more sustainable time management environment so that they can reinvest into the change efforts that they're trying to make.
Because you're always late when you're reacting, because you're responding to something, but then at the same time you forget something else. And then exactly what you
Exactly.
described, you're just your fire extinguisher and putting on every fire which is coming up there. Yeah? Definitely. And if you would say, what is the good plan for an organizational development? You have as management thing, you have to plan it, I guess. Yeah. And what you would say, what leaders need to know? What are your thoughts, recommendations? What leaders should avoid doing, and how should they structure organizational development?
Yeah, I think when I consider organizational development, I think of what do we do to make our organizations more healthy, more efficient, more productive. And there's lots of different mechanisms and ways we can do that. We talk a lot about, organizational culture. We talk about employee engagement, talk about creativity and innovation. All of these things are byproducts of good, proactive organizational development mentality within an organization. And so if a leader wants to embrace this mindset and they want to be organizational development practitioners as part of their leadership role, they need to recognize that there's a whole range of different things that will influence the health of the organization, the efficiency, the productivity, the innovation. It's simple things. It's practices, policies, procedures. It's the way that the reward system is structured. It's the way, it's the leadership example and the workplace example that executives and leaders portray for lower level employees. It's the types of symbols and the way the work space is designed. It's all of these elements and many more that I didn't just mention that create the environment in which people do their work, and that will either reinforce or degrade the type of culture that you want to have, and the level of engagement and innovation and all these other things. And so first and foremost, a leader needs to recognize their essential role in creating and maintaining a sustainable, positive organizational environment. And they need to understand the different components. They need to map out, they need to think, take a systems perspective, and they need to map out how the different elements and components of their organization interact with each other and interconnect and relate to each other. And only if they're able to take that big picture systems approach to their organization will they really be able then to start pulling the levers of employee motivation, engagement, productivity, and all these different elements. From there, they need to then collect data. They need to talk to their people. They need to create employee buy-in. They need to involve their people in the discussions and the decision making that will happen as you're trying to develop and maintain that positive culture, that positive structure, that positive environment. And it's not really rocket science. It's hard to do, and a lot of organizations really struggle to do it well. It's not rocket science. It's the scientific method. You have a problem. There's some sort of a gap. You create a hypothesis about why that problem is occurring. You then gather information, collect data, see how that supports or doesn't support your hypothesis. You then look for changes that need to be made and implemented. You create employee buy-in. You involve them in the discussion, and then you stay consistent with your effort and continue to work at it rather than just a short-term approach, because short-term approaches never work. And so if you have a long-term sustainable approach, then you can start to see meaningful change. It's not rocket science, but it does take a consistent commitment from leaders in the organization to see it come to fruition. And if they don't have that commitment, then even the best laid plans will end up reverting back to the status quo over time. They'll even if there's positive change in the short term, over time things will just go back to how they were.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned it's a cultural thing. It's about relationship, it's about people. As a leader, you have to drive things and have to involve people within the organization, within all the stakeholders you need to make the proper decisions for the future, how you want to develop. And that is, as you said, it's not a rocket science, but it's a stringent, planned approach. It's not a waterfall. It could be agile, whatever the buzzwords at the moment are in consulting and management. But it's a constant improvement process, if you like. Huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can call it Kanban, you can call it operational excellence. It all comes to the same thing. You have to cope with change, with the future, with something probable or even unlikely, and just deal with it and make the best out of it in terms of management decision for the company. You know?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
And I agree completely. You have involved the proper people, your team, to do this change. You can't do it only in your ivory tower of management. And we said as well, it's a people-centric approach to leadership, and I think there's something you focus within your academic as well, your practitioner role quite well. Probably you can give here some ideas how you can do a more people-centric approach within management. Because,
yeah. You know, again, I think it comes back to really what's your paradigm in management and leadership. Some people are they have a control paradigm. So they're more of a micromanaging type of an approach. They feel like it has to do with trust. You know, can I trust my people to do what needs to be done? Can I empower them and delegate, and will they deliver? Or do I have to oversee everything they do and control them through really strict policies and practices and whatnot? It's a fundamental kind of philosophical approach to how we see our people within the organization. And do we see them as a necessary evil, where people are going to try to get away with whatever they can get away with and do the bare minimum? Is that how we see our employees? Or do we see our employees as bundles of capabilities and potential that if we help them unlock that potential, they will thrive and they will do great things? Unfortunately, kind of the traditional thinking around leadership 50 years ago, you know, it was more of a control model, right? And over time, we've realized more and more that, and over time, we've realized more and more that's not actually the most effective, especially if you want to drive creativity and innovation. And so there has been a big shift, but we still have plenty of leaders who they don't really know how to lead. They're probably mostly mimicking how other leaders in their life have led them. And then they end up having this control model, and it just doesn't really work. So a people-centric organization, a people-centric culture, or a people-centric approach to leadership, it recognizes the innate value of the people you work with. It requires you to treat them with dignity and respect, and to trust them, and to work towards empowering them and helping them grow and develop. That is a very different mindset than seeing your people as peons, cogs in a machine, interchangeable and dispensable people that you need to tightly control. And the way your overarching paradigm and philosophy, that will influence your policies, practices, and procedures within the organization. And that's what I see a lot of times, is even if you have a progressive leader who has more of a people-centric attitude, a lot of the policies, practices, and procedures institutionally aren't actually people-centric. And so the leaders constantly butting their heads up against, you know, institutional norms and policies while trying to also empower their people. And that can be a problem. And that's where organizational development comes in, because organizational development then says, we need to better align our policy, practices, and procedures with the actual type of culture that we want to have. And hopefully that would be a people-centric approach, a people-centric culture.
Yeah, plus you have to work with the people who are on board. Means if you want to change them, that takes a long time. Means you have to find and come and approach with the people on board to do something good for everybody. And that's exactly what this, I agree with this people-centric approach is. And looking back in the typical production industry, that could be, if you want to mimic a kind of an algorithm, then people are only part of an algorithm, then you need this control. Means you have errors and you want to reduce these controls. But coming more to AI and automated product processes, you need more and more companies who innovate or designing more creative things which are much more people-centric at all. Yeah. And this production types of companies, they're not diminished, but they are getting to a very low level.
Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, the whole culture for the Western world changed dramatically. And let's see. For one last question, if you can give leaders 3 tips what to do and what to avoid in change initiatives, what you would say? I know it can even go 4 or 5.
Yeah. I think there's lots of pitfalls when trying to bring about a successful change initiative. A few of the things that I see consistently that people aren't doing is that they're not involving key constituencies across the organization in the process. So it's not enough to have a CEO or a C-suite executive, even the whole executive team on board. Even if they all are in agreement that something needs to happen, if they're just sending out an edict from their office, from the corporate office, saying this is what's going to happen, this is how it's going to happen, the chances of that being successful, no matter how much time or money they put into it, goes down dramatically, as compared to if they will involve key constituencies and key people across the organization in the discussions, in the process of designing the change initiative. So that's number one, both on the good and the bad side. Lots of organizations don't do that, and so they struggle and their change initiatives fail. The organizations that do have successful change initiatives involve their people, and not isolated chunks of people, but people across different areas of the organization. What I also see a lot of times is that they don't have an assessment plan or a sustainability plan for the change initiative. So how do you know if the change worked? How do you know if it's been successful? That requires metrics and that requires assessment. Not just a one-shot assessment, not just an employee engagement survey, though that's good, but it requires a whole systematic plan towards assessment over a period of time, so that you know if you've actually accomplished what you were trying to accomplish with the change initiative. That requires a level of commitment that a lot of organizations simply don't have, or they don't have the expertise on how to do it. So that often doesn't happen at all. And along with that, though, comes the sustainability plan. So many initiatives start out well, but they don't come to fruition because people get bored. They lose the energy. The momentum starts to dissipate. And so, change initiatives, especially the largest ones, they can take multiple years to be successful. Yep. And so even if people are energized around the change initiative for 6 months or even a year, if that's where it stops and it's not sustained momentum over a longer period of time, then people tend to revert back to the old ways of doing things, the old processes, procedures, practices, the old attitudes, all of those types of things tend to reemerge. So we have to have both an assessment plan so we know if what we're doing is working, but we also have to have a sustainability plan. How are we going to make sure that we keep people energized towards the change? How are we going to continue to build and maintain buy-in? How are we going to make sure that top leadership continues to prioritize the change in terms of the money, the time investment that has to go into it to be successful? I mean, honestly, if organizations can do those 3 things, the number of change initiatives that are successful would be way higher. But I was just reading an article in the Harvard Business Review just a week or 2 ago, and it reasserted a statistic that I'm sure you've heard, and other people have probably heard thrown around in the past, but a recent study at Harvard reinforced that about 75 to 80% of change initiatives fail in organizations. Why do they fail? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think those three that I just mentioned are among the most important elements that often aren't happening.
Yeah, I think so. Well, plus lots of change initiatives are more or less done by external consultants, and the people inside are not really completely involved. Only probably top management, and then you lack of support already. I mean, you need a common purpose, common objectives, common values you want to thrive for as a complete organization, and that can't be only the external McKinsey's, Boston consultants, whatever, who are doing this big strategy changes. And
yeah,
this buy-in is so difficult.
That's one of the things I learned. That was an early lesson that I learned when I started doing consulting work. There was one organization that I was working with, and it was a substantial change initiative. And I'd been working with them for probably a year and a half as an external consultant. But my primary points of contact with the company were the CHRO and other C-suite executives. I had only minimal interactions with lower level management and leadership, let alone other employees. And I was excited about what we were doing. It seemed like we had leadership buy-in. We were doing really positive things. And then one day it just completely imploded. The whole thing just like blew up in my face. And the reason, not the only reason, but one of the reasons was I hadn't learned that lesson yet. I hadn't learned how vital it is to get outside of the C-suite and to get talking with people at various levels and different divisions and different areas of the organization. I'd taken for granted. I figured that because the executive leadership was behind it, that people at the lower levels would be behind it, and they simply weren't. So that's a lesson I have not forgotten. And I hope
and it's so easy to follow normally.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but I have exactly the same impression, no? Very often, because then the C-level only wants to get the external control close to them, and you don't have the right to talk to the lower levels because they fear your day rate is much too high to talk to lower in the hierarchy. That's not good. No, it's not good, because you have to work with the people who are on board. Otherwise, you can't do the change.
Yep.
Jonathan, we are coming to the end of this. I enjoyed this interview very, very much. Thank you for your time and for your thoughts. Do you want to give a final statement for what you want to go for the change management should do all the world the same? Can they join you? Do you give some lessons in Utah University, Valley University, or I will give, and definitely anyway link your email and your website below, just to get in contact with you. But just for you, chance a little last remark for the audience.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the invitation. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. And I would just encourage people who might be interested to look me up on my company website, which you can find at innovativehumancapital.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can see more about me and my team there. You can see the various services that we provide and working with organizations. And really, we start with the idea that we want to maximize the human capital potential within organizations. We have a very robust podcast where you can listen to many experts talk about various aspects of successful organizational leadership. But we also have lots of other great resources that are free to organizational leaders to utilize. And hopefully you'll see that we can add value for you. And I would love to have a conversation with anyone who's looking for help in solving some of their most complex and perplexing organizational challenges.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you
bye.
very much. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.